The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious. The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hello and welcome to Scottish Independence podcast number 28. And this time I spoke with someone who is very well known in a certain section of the community in Scotland. He's also reached the Amazon bestseller list a couple of times, I think, in fact. His name is Paul Larkin. He writes books on a predominantly Celtic theme. He also blogs at frontofthebus.blogspot.co.uk. And he also occasionally writes about his support for Scottish independence. And we had a conversation a little bit about himself, a bit about the situation with Celtic fans and how they may or may not vote and why that might be. There's a lot in here for everyone, but this is definitely got a lot of stuff about Celtic Football Club and the furore surrounding some of the things going on with their support and the offensive behaviour bill in it as well. I've also got a little announcement at the end, so stay tuned for that. I'll have a wee word with you at the end then. Hello Paul, how's it going?
I'm very well, Michael. How are you?
Not too bad. Still enjoying the summer. We've been taking a lot of time off for the podcasts, but you've been busy. This is the first time I've had a guest on that's done more podcasts than me. So the first thing I'd ask you is, can you explain, I know you're very famous in one sort of part of the Scottish community, but maybe not to others, so do you want to explain a little bit just about who you are and what you do?
Well, basically I'm an author. I've wrote 7 books on Celtic and 1 novel with a Celtic theme, so you can probably guess what my kind of background is. I'm on various podcasts, the Homeboys, occasionally Beyond the Waves, the 10 in a Row podcast and that. And I can generally be found ranting on Twitter and Facebook and various other guises, you know.
Yeah, and I've read a couple of the books. I quite enjoyed them. It was good stuff. But why I thought you'd be good for this podcast is that I've read a couple of your blogs and you've said that it's time we got round to independence. And I think the Celtic supporting community is a very interesting area in this whole debate because there's a kind of connection with Labour, with a lot of the supporters with a historical connection, and also with the board part of the club, there's also a kind of connection with New Labour, with John Reid and maybe some others. But I think the supporters could be convinced maybe more than some other clubs. I mean, where do you think, before we get to yourself, what do you think about the position with the Celtic fans that you're speaking to at the moment is?
Well, I mean, I think you're right in terms of the Labour thing, because I think Labour for so many years held a massive stronghold in Glasgow, and particularly the East End of Glasgow. And it was kind of perceived where Labour just kind of took the Catholic vote for granted in Glasgow, and, you know, you would imagine that quite a lot of Celtic supporters are Catholics from Glasgow, and that was just the kind of way they always voted. And I think it probably took a long time for people in Scotland to realise that New Labour, you know, wasn't Labour, and it wasn't a New Labour, it was just a different party completely. And I think that there's definitely a debate to be had with Celtic supporters in terms of, you know, because the thing that I'll always hear is, oh, you know, I would never vote for the SNP, I'd never vote for Alex Salmond, he's this, he's that, and all that kind of thing. And I always say, well, fine, you know, just didn't vote for him, but this isn't voting for him, this is voting for independence or not. And it's like, and one guy said to me, but why would the SNP give up the thing they've been fighting for forever? And I was like, because you'll have the chance to do that, because there'll be an election after an independence. You know, it's not like it's going to be, right, okay, now we're just going to have a dictatorship for the rest of our lives. There'll be an election, and I think that, certainly from my perspective, I would say that, you know, 2 of the factors for me, amongst a myriad of other ones, about getting independence is to get rid of the Tory party completely, and to also get rid of the SNP, because I'm not a fan of either.
And we'll come around to the SNP and why some of the Celtic fans are so angry with the SNP. But just to go back on that Labour point, do you think that independence it's a theme that comes up quite often in the debate, that independence could be the thing that actually revitalises the Labour Party in Scotland?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that people like Joanne Lamont and that are they're playing the Westminster game at the minute. You know, they're getting their orders and they're doing what they're getting told. But I think that if you look at the demographic in Scotland, you know, I would say as a left-wing country, you just need to look at the way people have voted over the last century. And I think that a Scottish Labour Party, not the Scottish Labour Party as we see it right now, but one that was actually more about, the kind of socialist ideals of the past, perhaps, would certainly be a lot more successful than the current one is. I mean, I know people say that the election 2011 was kind of like a backlash against Labour. I didn't think it was. I think it was the people of Scotland saying to the SNP, right, you're talking independence, here's your mandate to go and get. And so probably caught the SNP on the hop. But in terms of the Scottish Labour Party, I think had to go to the kind of de facto position of opposing that. But I think that in general, their kind of participation in the Better Together campaign has been an absolute disaster. And it's been really good, I think, that they went kind of on the offensive with that kind of stuff, and it was all about negativity because people have kind of got sick of that. I think in any circumstance, no matter if you completely agree strongly with a person and they're moaning and groaning about something, eventually you just turn around and tell them to shut up because you have enough of it. And I think that's what people are collectively starting to do now. So I think whilst Labour will do what kind of Ed Miliband and cohorts tell them for London right now, I would suggest that a lot of Labour politicians in Scotland will probably be sort of secretly hoping for independence.
Yeah, it's bizarre, the negativity that's come out of it. We've constantly been told about this positive case for the union that's going to arrive. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if you have. I don't know where it's been. It's all too small, too weak, too stupid, too poor.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big issues, Michael. It's about I've not heard anybody tell me why we should stay in union. I've had plenty of people tell me why we shouldn't have independence. I mean, I've had people say to me, I've had conversations with people from all sorts of degrees of the spectrum, and people say to me, but I didn't understand this, and I didn't, what about this and what about that, and all that kind of thing. And I say to them all the time, I say, that's fine, you have opinions, we can debate them on and on, but here's the reality you can never forget, that if you don't go for it, it means more of the same. And more of the same means 2 million people living below the poverty line, huge unemployment, all these kind of things, the NHS getting into illegal wars, Trident, all these kind of things. That's what you're voting for if you're voting for to keep part of the union. And I think that the SNP, whilst I'm not a fan of them, I think they're playing a really good game at the minute because there's no need for them to be on the offensive about what's great about Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
People need to just focus on first. Let's get out of the way. Let's see what's crap about Scotland right now. And every time, whether it be Osborne or Cameron or anybody like that, kind of sneaks into Scotland and tells you why you should still be part of the union because Alex Salmond's never done this and Alex Salmond's never that. All Alex Salmond has to say as well, I'd love to do that, but we can't as long as we're part of the union.
Yeah, absolutely. He's hamstrung in a lot of ways. But they do occasionally sort of point to that. Well, like we've saved as much of the NHS as we can. We've saved free tuition fees and that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's difficult for them because they do sort of point and say, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? But I want to run this one you by. It was a little story from the campaign trail. But we had one on the show one time, and he said we pointed out to him that a lot of people were a bit worried that the Yes campaign are being too nicey in the face of some pretty scurrilous stuff from the No campaign. And there was some, if you check Newsnet Scotland, you'll have seen some stuff today that might have been there's accusations of doctoring photos and stuff going on today. And in the face of all this, that maybe they're being too nicey. And our guy that we had on said, we've studied previous campaigns and we've worked out that if you have a negative campaign and another negative campaign, it's always the most negative campaign that wins. But if you have a negative campaign against a positive campaign, then it's the positive one that wins. We weren't entirely convinced by that, but I don't know about yourself.
Well, first of all, I watched a debate on Newsnet probably 10, 15 days ago, and it was about the monarchy and, in terms of the independence thing and all that kind of thing. And they never had a Republican on it, and I just thought, well, wait, where's the balance here? And I think
was this the BBC by any chance?
It's easy to get, it's easy to drag somebody up and say, Scotland should just stay part of the union, as it is to say, oh yes, we should keep the monarchy. I would state my position clear. I'm not interested in keeping the monarchy, the pound, any of that kind of stuff. And I think that what Better Together's negativity is aimed at keeping the discussion about should we be independent, yes or no, and that's it. When in reality, what the debate should be about is what kind of independent Scotland do we actually want here? Because people, I think most kind of rounded human beings want one that looks after our poor people and our pensioners and our disabled people. One that's progressive about immigration instead of the kind of horror stories that we're hearing from London this week alone, which has just horrified me. one that doesn't just invade countries because of monetary reasons and things like that. And let's have that debate, because that's a debate that Better Together can't win, and that's why they don't want to have the debate.
Yes. Do you think Scotland are failing in not bringing these things up more?
Perhaps they should be. I mean, I know what you mean, because I think that one of the kind of many feelings of the Obama administration is expecting the Republican Party to do deals and just be sensible and stuff. I don't think that's going to happen with Better Together. I also don't think, though, that the time to have these kind of debates is now. I think once they come back for the Scottish Parliament session in the fall, then that's when to start ramping up, because I would suggest that what you are going to see in Scotland next year is the Commonwealth Games. The First World War anniversary, it's going to be a huge part played by Scottish people. And then, of course, you've got the whole thing with the bridges and stuff like that. And this will be, I think, some of the things that the Yes campaign will put positivity on the back of. But I would also suggest that the Yes campaign really didn't have to be that negative when you consider that every time something happens in London, it impacts on the people of Scotland. If you take into consideration things like the bedroom tax and, the way disabled people are being treated and so on and so forth. The very fact that David Cameron and George Osborne have to actually sneak into this country, to actually come up here might give them enough idea about what exactly the feeling is. I think it's also a great thing that we chased Nigel Farage out of the country.
That was brilliant. I love that.
I think, because the people, he can go rant and rave and he loves all the publicity, of course. But that's inspiring for our young people to turn around and say, no, actually, we didn't want your racist, bigoted politics in our country. You have no truck in this country. Get out. And he was, to coin the phrase, sent homeward to think again. And it's good. It's inspiring, because I think that to win this election, and I firmly believe we will get independence, but I think it'll be won by our young people. And I didn't just mean the 16-year-olds that can vote. I mean the students and the early 20s and that kind of thing. They'll be the ones that will win the election for Scotland, because they're the most progressive people in this country right now, I believe.
There's still a kind of thing, the wartime generation, the older generation, who maybe are more unionist because they went through. There's this kind of idea that they went through the world wars together, and that kind of thing. I actually had this because I've been an independent supporter all my life. But I've never been aligned to a particular party. But I had the idea that all this was coming 10 years later. I had the idea that all this was going to happen sort of 2022. And it's like you said at the beginning there, that it sort of caught the SNP on the hop. So do you think this generational thing is going to cause a problem for a Yes vote? It's an interesting area.
I don't think so, and I'll tell you why, because I think people need to understand, and it's easy to think, I can see why people think the opposite right now, is that devolution was about stopping independence. People have to understand that power devolved as power retained. That was what New Labour thought, that we can put this thing to bed. What in actual fact it's looked like, and you've only got to look at the political map of Scotland in the last 20 years to see how it's went from red to kind of SNP yellow, is the political landscape has changed so much because of devolution, and that the people, rather than saying, oh, no, we're happy with devolution, have actually said, you know what, we actually do want independence. We want to give you the mandate. Now, on the point about the whole generational thing, I genuinely believe that whilst there is probably a kind of collectively real kind of unionist in Scotland, I think it's shrunk so much in the last 20 years. And there have been different things. I think the rise of the SNP is obviously one of them, because what I would say to people is, look at the state of the SNP after Salmon left and Swinney took over. It was an absolute joke. Salmon came back and got the power in Scotland, and you have to take your hat whether you agree or disagree with him at all. I also think that the unionism that's being defined by Better Together is something that only relates to maybe 5% of people, if you're lucky, in Scotland. Because if you're looking at wartime generations and that kind of thing, whilst the struggles and the people, that it was very noble what they went through, and it was all working class people, of course, and it was, lines led by donkeys, that immediately brings up any kind of wartime stuff, also brings up things like Iraq and Afghanistan. And you've got people now saying, well, we're in Afghanistan 10 years, there's going to be an election next year, the Taliban are standing, so what were we there for exactly? Yeah. And similarly with Iraq. I found it incredible, and they've got more coverage, the fact that now all the plaudits for pulling out Iraq came, and then, oh, by the way, we've just discovered oil in California. And so, all right, and so the people kind of get the correlation with that. So yeah. I think that Scotland is a really progressive nation, and I think if you look at the debates that are going on in England, they have no truck in Scotland. The whole immigration debate has no truck whatsoever. We need people in this country. You would solve about 60% of the ills of Scotland, by having 10 million people more in the country, including the football team. So I think that these kind of politics. I mean, you watch an issue Question Time, for example, and you watch politicians.